Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator, and on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought we'd kind of look at how we're evaluating the performance of our herbicide programs on our soybeans, which we're kind of at the end of spraying here going forward. We're at that stage. I don't know that I recall a season going this fast. We didn't get started overly early planting, but everything got planted really fast. With all the heat we've had this summer, this crop has just been on a really rapid pace, probably as fast as it can grow, especially where it had rain off and on. But we're looking at wrapping up our first pass herbicide programs in soybeans here this week, and I think most of the first treatments are done unless it was a really late planted field or something like that. So we're concerned, as always, how our performance is on water hemp and soybeans, and especially early on we were so dry that these beans in some cases are going to be a little shorter, and we wonder about, are we going to get to a good canopy or not? So we want to make sure that we've got good control of our herbicides on this water hemp population. First step would be what stage our beans are in to evaluate what our options would even be. But a lot of these beans now are flowering. We got a lot of beans flowering in June already, even before the longest day of the year, which has just passed us. But we've had beans flowering in some of these earlier planted fields for a couple weeks already, for sure a week on a lot of them. So we start getting into that reproductive phase, our options start to dwindle pretty quickly. But before we decide if we even need to do any other herbicide applications, I wanted to show you kind of a lot of these beans. If they didn't get Liberty on them, they're going to have probably either an enlist or an extend, probably more of the enlist, which is basically the 2,4-D treatments attacking the water hemp. As with any growth regulator, what they're doing is they try and basically affect that plant's growth hormones, and they kind of grow themselves to death in a really rapid pace. That's why they kind of, their hormones get all out of whack as far as what they need, and they grow too fast, they twist and gnarl, and that's what we want to see. But if we look at some of these water hemp, there's a couple various things to look at in this population in this field, for instance, and a lot of them are like it. The really small ones we got where they were 3 inches or less, those are all knotted up and look pretty good yet. It's been a week after application here, so nothing's for sure yet, but you can kind of start to tell. We've got some that are in pretty good shape as far as control looks like they're wilted and aren't going to really do anything. That looks pretty good. But we do have some in here. You can almost see if there's water hemp that are out there, if they're much bigger than 4 inches, your control starts to get inconsistent. You start getting 8-inch to 10-inch, you're going to feel good after looking at them about 3 days after application, but that's about where they start turning back up a lot of times. We've got some pictures here of some of those growing points or even the tops of the plants that kind of neck down first. Now they're starting to stick their head back up, and once they do that, you're almost guaranteed they're not going to die. They probably are going to grow slow for a while. You'd kind of like to hope the beans would canopy and maybe shade them out and keep them from being as competitive, but that's what you're wanting to evaluate. Are those growing points, are they sticking their head back up, facing upwards, or are they just kind of all twisted, gnarled, no development yet? You can see that as you go out into these water hemp patches or whatever, what's going on. In a Liberty scenario, we have to get great coverage. That's why we use different nozzles and a lot of water, trying to get coverage on all the growing points. And again, as water hemp gets bigger, you've got a lot more growing points to kill. And if you don't cover them with Liberty or any contact herbicide, you're not going to kill them. We try and use really fine droplets, kind of fog it in there with higher water volumes in a lot of cases with, we used to do that all the time with Cobra, but Liberty's the same, it's a contact killer. So if you can go out into a water hemp patch and find some bigger water hemp, we can kill some bigger water hemp with Liberty than we can with 2,4-D if the weather is really good and everything is really just right and it's a single plant by itself. But it's also more variable in control. If the weather isn't quite right, if we don't have enough humidity, we didn't have as much warmth, which that hasn't been much of a problem this year, but we need sunshine, we need some humidity so those pores are open. We can do a little bit better job of burning the heck out of the thing and hopefully kill all the growing points. If we don't, you're going to set it back a long ways, but those growing points may come back to life again and they may have to be dealt with again, and that's where the challenge comes in. any of these fields, you know, that are this size or whatever, they're probably at R1, which is a flower somewhere on the plant. Their first flower signifies R1. R2 is flowers kind of basically to the top of the plant. And that happens fairly quickly after R1, really, a matter of less than a week usually. We can apply the Liberty retreatment up until there's flowers on the plant. So like I say, most bean fields, that's almost out the window already according to the label. Will it really hurt the beans if you do it after the label time? It may or may not, but there's evidence that some fields in the past have been sprayed later than label timing, and there have been instances where if it was spot sprayed or spray a couple passes along a waterway to burn off some late coming water hemp, those beans ended up maturing quite a bit later. I don't know the physiology or the reasoning behind that, but that is a risk you take. And of course, it's an off-label application, which we'd like to try and avoid. To go back and retreat some of those with 2,4-D on an Enlist, of course we can't with Extend because it's off, you know, we're past the date, but with the 2,4-D retreatment, you can do that through R2 on label. Something that's been curled up, that's kind of neck back up. I don't know how effective we're going to be with another treatment of an Enlist. It might be your only option though. We can go out there through R2 with the Enlist or the 2,4-D treatments on the Enlist beans. If it's not water hemp, which usually that's what we're fighting, but if it's not water hemp, Roundup is the same way. If you're retreating with Roundup for some other weeds, that's an R2 application limit too. So once we start getting here another week down the road, there's gonna be a lot of bean fields we really probably can't do a lot on label. Cobra would still be on label. That's assuming your water hemp population is not resistant to the PPO class of chemistry. A lot of fields have a lot of problems with that. That's one of the reasons why we've adapted the Enlist and the Extend so quickly. But if that's an option for you, that's on label for a while yet. That's actually a pre-harvest interval. That's not a growth stage dictated. That's kind of, you know, really our options when it comes to managing late season weeds and water hemp. If you happen to have some volunteer corn or some grass, again, the clethodim type products, the Section 3, the Select Max, those types of things are labeled up to a pre-harvest interval, not a growth stage, and they're usually pretty harmless on the soybeans as far as that goes. But I think we all probably are more concerned about water hemp in most fields. So just wanted to bring you up to speed on where we're at. We're at that stage where if it's been sprayed for a week, you can go out and look into these fields and see, are we going to get control of these or not? Early indications are kind of like last year. Our best control fields on water hemp look like the Liberty and Liberty Enlist on these 2,4-D beans. That looks really solid. You got the Enlist being a systemic herbicide, you got the Liberty being a coverage herbicide, so you burn a lot of the growing points off on the tops of the plants. Hopefully you get a little bit of the 2,4-D in to take out those growing points systemically lower on the plant, but that's been pretty successful. It's not a cheap treatment, but as we get into this water hemp management, I don't think cheap is going to be in our vocabulary anymore. We're already running into problems. We can't fight with anything else. So, but just wanted to bring you up to speed where we're at on this weed control of the soybeans this year, and just what to be looking for going forward. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.